I'm very grateful to Mr. Deepak Bhatt for inviting me to talk on the magic of management excellence. I'm a very highly depreciated asset at 84 years old, but he seems to have thought that maybe I still have some juice left in me. Deepak Bhai, I first of all commend you for your effort at presenting to people various aspects of management, and I think it will be a very fine thing to do. It is also a very auspicious day for us, all of us in India and abroad. It's Gandhiji's birthday. And to me, Gandhiji was not only the greatest human being of India of his times, but he was also a very, very great and innovative manager to be able to lead 400 million people in a very innovative way, using nonviolence and so on and so forth, to independence was a unique act of management. So let me begin my talk. I studied professional management at Wharton School and at Carnegie Mellon University, MBA and Ph.D. And then I taught at McGill University for 6 years. And I was therefore very strongly influenced by what I had learned in North America. I did feel that in India, with our low productivity and efficiency in business, that these tools and techniques and systems of professional management would be very helpful in raising the levels of efficiency and productivity. And so I came back to India to try and, if you like, proselytize Indian business people in the use of professional management tools and techniques. But then I thought that let me spend a year or two in studying Indian management practices so that I could be much better at explaining to them how they would benefit by changing their styles of management. I studied for about a year and a half. I talked to a lot of people business people, managers, read a lot of case studies, read whatever was published in research on that, and so forth. And I won't go into details of what I learned a lot. I won't go into details of that, but I did find one thing very magical. And I want to talk about that a little bit. And that was the Padta system of the Birlas. I had a chance to talk to the Birlas in Mumbai, and they explained to me that they were running 300 companies at that time. 1975 was the time I came back. And at that time, they were running about 300 companies, and controlling them was very difficult because the Birlas were only a handful. And therefore, they had to appoint heads, mostly from the community, to head these companies. Now, they developed a very exciting mode of control that I had not encountered anywhere in the world. That was a Padta system in which every day, mind you, every day, all 300 companies sent to the Birla headquarters in Mumbai a statement in code of the production for the day, sales for the day, profit for the day, cash balance for the day, collections for the day, debtors for the day, and so on. 8 or 9 different items. And I thought this was simply amazing because, to imagine 300 companies daily sending a report on 8 or 9 parameters of performance to the headquarters. Look at the phenomenal control that the Birlas could exercise on these 300 companies. And the managers had to be on toe because every day the Birlas would read the report. So that was my first magical moment when I came back to India. I encountered in India 6 different forms of management that differed very sharply from the kind of management that I thought was ideal for India, namely the tools and techniques and systems-oriented professional management that we teach in MBA programs in India and abroad. And I want to talk about these, the kind of magic that I unfolded before me. So, looked at the Indian system. First thing was that I was a consultant to the World Bank And the World Bank was very concerned about the malperformance of public enterprises all over the world. They had been lending money to countries like ours to speed up economic development. And these countries in turn set up these public enterprises. And India, as you know, set up a huge number of public enterprises at that time. And many of them, most of them were performing badly. So the World Bank was concerned, and they asked me to look at the Indian public sector and advise as to what could be done. It was a problem. It's a long study, a huge study, but there were particularly 4 case studies I looked at in that study of 4 companies, public sector companies, all owned by the government of India. One was HMT, was a very professionally managed company, and I don't want to talk about that. But 3 other companies were in the process of being turned around. They had been sick earlier, headed by bureaucrats. Then they had a change of chief executive, each of them, who was a professional manager. And I was there at the time when the companies were being turned around. So I had a terrific ringside view of the turnaround action. And I was very impressed with the way these people were so dynamic, these managers, that they were able to turn around each of these companies in 1 year. I want to give just one example of that. One example that I want to give is that of Richardson and Prudus, a company which was owned by the British. The British, they left when independence came, was taken over by a Marwadi person who looted the company. And because the company had 4,000 employees, the government took it over to protect employment. Then it was headed by a succession of bureaucrats, IAS officers, and so on. And the company just was poorly managed, making losses, and so on. Now, Mr. Sarangpani, the engineer who took over the company, professional manager, he engaged in what I call high velocity, multi-pronged, dynamic, intuitive, and creative kind of management. And I'm going to give you some examples of kinds of actions he took. The whole point was to try and revitalize the company quickly. Speed was of the essence. And one of the first acts of his was that there was a lot of scrap lying around in the plants of the company. And he had this gathered up and sold it off. And he sold it off for a very decent amount of cash, which is badly needed by the company. So that was one act. Secondly, the company had a large product line. It was a structurals company. So a large product line was there. He got an ABC analysis done. A products were those that were profitable. B products were those where you could do some work on them and make them profitable. C products were hopeless. So he summarily stopped producing C products. Secondly, he tried to get out of low value added structurals into high value added structurals. There were some very interesting things he did. Besides that, he went to the ministry. His ministry was Ministry of Heavy Industry. And he said, would you please convert the loans you have given to me into equity? Why? Because that way I can save on interest. I don't have to pay interest to India, to the department. So he tried to do that. So, interestingly, RNC was by no means an R&D company. There's no R&D facilities at all. And yet, Mr. Sarangpani went to the Minister of Science and Technology to say that, could you give us some funds for R&D? Not only that, he also, India was giving foreign aid to some countries. So he went to these countries' people and said, would you please give us some projects? See the opportunism of this man. There was a strike in rubber plants, which he broke it, which is very difficult to do in the public sector, at that time at least. He also tried to build up a good rapport with the employees and the managers. For example, he started the practice of greeting each employee on his birthday, personally. And not only that, he used to throw parties for his managers with their wives quite frequently to again build up a whole culture of friendship and working together. He set up he tried to bring about more coordination and cooperation by having a monthly meeting of all the managers, where he strongly stressed achievement of targets and innovation, bringing about changes and opportunities, taking opportunities. And also, there were performance review meetings at that, so that the performance was also kept in track. He set up several profit centers to sharpen accountability for performance. Something very interesting he did was that he found that his managers had not been grooming the subordinates. So he said that no manager will be promoted unless he gives in writing to me 2 names of subordinates who they feel are capable of taking over when I promoted. Now, very quickly, the managers started grooming the managers because they wanted promotion, and this was the only way they could get a promotion. Number of other things he did, but I'll skip all that. So this company was turned around in 1 year, and then subsequently it kept on increasing its profits. I did a later study of turnarounds of private sector companies, and there it was something very interesting. These 6 companies had been turned around, but 3 of them were making bumper profits, and 3 of them were kind of just breaking even. So I was interested in knowing what was the matter. So I analyzed the actions they had taken, and I found that the companies that were making bumper profits after turnaround had engaged in 4 times more turnaround actions than the companies that had kind of more or less just did a few things and kept static. So I began to realize that the kind of management that seemed to work in India, in the government sector, public sector versus private sector, at least in certain circumstances, was very different from the kind of management that I had been taught in the West. And I felt that this should be included in the MBA curriculum of our country, because this is something that has worked in India very well. I was very interested in turnaround management. I thought it was very dynamic. So I gathered 120 cases from all over the world, and I compiled them in a book and analyzed them. And the book was titled Turnaround Excellence, Insights from 120 Cases. Now, I want to cite from those cases one very interesting way a very, very large Indian public sector company created a platform for high velocity creative management. And that company was Steel Authority of India, or SAIL. Now, SAIL was the largest steel maker in India, public sector. But for years, it had been doing poorly, losses, meager profits, and so on. And Mr. V. Krishnamurthy, who had been very dynamic at BHEL, was brought in to rejuvenate the company. And very interestingly, we see how he created a platform for change. First, he didn't know the steel industry at all. He didn't know steel technology, didn't know steel business. So he spent 6 months in talking, 6 months in talking to some 25,000 internal and external stakeholders, individually or in groups, to understand better what were the problems facing SAIL and what could be done. After that, becoming very familiar with SAIL, he developed something called the priorities for action, a whole list of things, quick payoff, fast action things that he listed that were called priorities for action. And interestingly, he sent this list of priorities for action to all 200,000 employees of the company. Just see the power of this idea. So that everyone in the company, right from top to bottom, was aware of what was going to happen. Not only that, There were 500 general managers of the company. So he got them to Ranchi, which is headquarters of SAIL, in batches of 80. And he personally coached them, each one of them, all in batches of 20, 80. He coached them in priorities for action, how to implement them. Then that was not all. They in turn went back to their plants and did their own priorities for action and their own coaching and so forth. So you can imagine that within 8 or 9 months, the entire company, a huge 200,000 company employees, was alive with ideas, alive with wanting to change, bring about changes and innovations. And SAIL broke even the very first year that Mr. Krishnamurthy joined the company. And then it had a trajectory of rising profits. So that in 1 year, I remember, the profits of SAIL exceeded the profits of Tata Steel. Quite a remarkable way Mr. Krishnamurthy managed. But again, not much professional management of the kind that I had studied. Professionalism, yes, but not necessarily tools, techniques, and systems-oriented professional management. Some he did use, but not a great deal. A lot of intuitive, common sense kind of things were done. Once upon, yeah. I was very lucky after my retirement in 2002. I had the opportunity of mentoring workshops of social leaders. Most of them were NGO heads, but some of them were CSR heads. Some of them were academics who were interested in social development, and so on. A group of people, but mostly NGOs. And I mentored them in each group for 8 days. And so very intensive relationship happened. I got to hear their stories and so on. And I was amazed at the amount of achievement they could have, despite, NGOs don't have large resources. They have kind of hand-to-mouth existence. They have to depend on donations and so forth. So they, in spite of these scanty resources, they don't have means of earning money. They have to get money from as donations. They were able to achieve amazing things. One example is, of course, of Seva. Now, Seva is based in Ahmedabad, founded by Ella Ben Bhatt. Now, to date, Seva has something like 3 million very poor self-employed women as members. It's a huge number of them, probably one of the largest trade union, come cooperative, come whatever NGO in this country. And what Seva does is to train them, give them a lot of training, a lot of confidence. There is a lot of challenging assignments that they take up. Seva also has a bank which gives credit for them to produce things. Seva is a cooperative society also. Seva is also has a body that gets into public policy issues and so on. It's a very diversified organization. And what was amazing was the kind of confidence with which these ladies, I heard them personally several times, they could talk. They could talk to ministers, they could talk to secretaries of government of Gujarat and so on, and very, very fluently, without any diffidence. These 3 million people, women, who were very poor, were able to earn a lot more because of their trading and so on. And as a consequence, they were able to educate their children better, have more nutritious food in their homes, and their standing in the community and in their families went up. So it was an amazing example of the kind of change that could be brought about by Seva. Without earning money in a professional way. They could get donations and get a little money here and there, but by and large, it was really getting donations. There are a number of other examples that I want to share. For example, a chap called Muhammad Tariq, and his passion was to rehabilitate beggars in Bombay. And this fellow was at an academic institution while there he started this business of rehabilitating beggars. And can you imagine 25,000 beggars in Mumbai were rehabilitated? Many were sent back to their families, many were got training, got jobs, and so on and so forth. So that was one remarkable example. Second was Osama Manza's Digital Empowerment Foundation, which uh, connected up, which gave computer literacy, that was a mission, to hundreds of thousands of villages and connected up hundreds of rural institutions like panchayats, so they could communicate with each other and share their experiences and so on and so forth. Third was Pavitra Vindhya's Infomedia India, Vindhya Infomedia, BPO. It was a BPO she started, and her passion was to give jobs in this BPO to women who were disabled, blind women, lame women, one arm missing, and so on and so forth. And she was hoping that in a few years, she would be able to employ something like 5,000 such disabled people in her BPO. Mr. Ashok Kamath was an IIT graduate, was in the corporate sector, gave up his corporate job, went to Akshara Foundation, Bangalore, because his passion was to try and improve the quality of education, government schools, but the education level is very poor. And he brought about so many changes and innovations that over 1 million kids in not only in Karnataka, but in adjoining states also have had much better education because of his efforts. Ashok Anshu Gupta's Gunj had this passion for producing clean napkins for menstruating women. And so several thousand women were given these napkins free of charge so that they could, otherwise they would be using paper and dirty cloth and all that, and what would get infected. So this was his passion. And I can go on, but the point simply is that these people had this enormous passion for their cause. It was not money that motivated them, nor were the people who came into their NGOs money-minded. They came on modest salaries, but they gave their completely all to the cause. And then I was interested in knowing how come these, how come these NGOs with such scant resources have been able to do so much? And I came up with a number of insights. First of all, there has to be a very strong altruistic orientation in the founder. He must really want to do good. Second, he should bring into the NGO or his social organization people, like-minded people, people with that kind of passion, so that they are not in there for money. They would be getting some salary, but not very high salary. But they would have that passion to do good in that particular area of the NGO. They were practical idealists, if you like. Third, they had to have the staff had to have a capacity to bond with poor people. It is not easy to bond with poor people. They are often quite suspicious. But these people developed that capacity partly because they themselves came from not very wealthy backgrounds. But they had this capacity to bond with poor people and induce them to go for change. Then the capacity to improvise, innovate, bring about tangible improvement was very important. Things had to be tangible, not abstract ideas, but something that people could actually experience the improvement. That was important. Also, they were able to use the power structure well. The government bodies, the corporations, locally influential people like sadhus, panchayat heads, and so on, they were able to use them for attaining the goals of the NGO organization. They often faced a lot of stress. They had to develop that capacity to face stress. They were creative, but they also had a sharp analytical ability. They could do both, be creative and be analytical. Uh, they had a great deal of capacity to implement projects very effectively. The strong task achievement orientation of the staff, a capacity to learn, to top team to mobilize the internal and external stakeholders for helping the organization, and so on. So when you look at this cluster of traits, very, very different from the kind of tools and techniques oriented professional management that I was exposed to. So again, I feel that this is the kind of management that we must teach in the MBA programs. We must publicize this because it has yielded so much. Another magical thing I encountered was not in India, but in Britain. You know, public administration has not been a strong point in many countries. Mrs. Thatcher came to power in the 1980s, and Britain had developed a very large welfare state. A lot of public services were being offered to the public, but they were headed by bureaucrats. And there was a lot of dissatisfaction among the people because of the inefficiency, slowness, etc. of these bureaucrats. So Mrs. Thatcher came to power on the platform of getting the government off the back of the people. That was the slogan. And what she did was she said, well, why don't we try to use private sector type management in the public sector? Not privatization was another thing that she did, but that apart, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the government being government, and yet the government being managed as if it was managed in the private sector. What she did was very interesting. There are lots of these departments, ministries. In each ministry, there are a number of activities going on. So what she did was, or she and her team did was, to carve out of these agencies, the ministries, homogeneous bodies, which they call agencies, executive agencies. Like, for example, if you are Minister of Education, you would have one department in charge of higher education, one in charge of school education, one in charge of secondary education. There could be three agencies, each one in charge of each type of education. So she created these agencies, several, I think over 120, 30 agencies. And what she did was that instead of having these headed by bureaucrats, she had them headed by professional managers who had understanding of the area of the agency. So a huge change in Britain from bureaucratic management to largely expertise-based public sector management. Not privatization. I'm not talking about the privatization, which she did in a big way, but I'm talking about the public governance itself. So this was done. Now each head of the agency had a lot of autonomy. He or she signed an MOU with the parent ministry, which laid out the goals of the agency, the autonomy that the agency would have, the kind of support the government would give, and the kind of things that the agency would do, implement. Each agency had a performance reporting system where the agency reported to the ministry, its parent ministry, its achievements in quantitative, qualitative, and social impact. The agencies had a lot of autonomy. For example, each agency could have its own pay scale. There's no uniform pay scale as in most governments. So there was a performance reporting system. There was a lot of flexibility, and there was a study of these agencies by a body, which concluded that they studied 127 agencies in England, and the conclusion was extremely flexible. The agency model has changed the landscape of government. Extremely flexible, it provides the most responsive and accountable framework for delivering executive function from within government. Yes, there was a fair bit of professional management in these agencies, but there was also a lot of autonomy and flexibility. And people could take a lot of initiatives. A lot of accountability was fostered by citizens' charters, where each agency would publicize what citizens' clients would expect from the agency. There was a grievance redress mechanism. So that if somebody who is a customer of the agency felt aggrieved, he could go to the grievance redress agency and get a grievance. There was efficiency audits. The agency could outsource functions to other bodies to cut costs and so on. Number of very, very flexible kind of management. So what was the impact? Britain, which was lagging behind France, Italy, and Germany in growth rate, after the institutionalization of new public management, which is what it is called, Britain's growth rate is 40% higher. There was a survey of government effectiveness of 150 countries, 0 being the average, and then the scores being given. The score for Britain was 1.97. The scores for Italy, France, and Germany were all below 150, 1.50. And the score for India was a miserable minus 0.26. So you can see the power of this idea. Now, as the consultant to the Second Administrative Reforms Commission, I very strongly advocated that we institute this in India. They accepted the report, but they slept on it. And then the government changed. The new government had no interest in this. So my report is gathering dust in some corner of the government of India. Another very magical thing that I encountered was the power of mission. You know, we always talk when we talk about professional management, we talk about incentives and salaries and perks and so on and so forth. Autonomy, power, etc., etc. Here we have a situation where people are giving to the organization, not taking from it. And there are two kinds of this mission charged organizations. One is the spiritual type, Ramakrishna Mission, for example. Chinmayanand's Chinmaya Mission. Pandurang Shastri Athawale's Swadhyay Parivar, Mother Teresa's Missionaries for Charity. All of these are institutions that have done wonderful work, amazing work. Take, for example, Ramakrishna Mission. The Ramakrishna Mission is run by 1,500 monks. Have taken the vow of celibacy. They take no salary. Their needs are taken care of, but they take no salary, no bonus. And yet, they run something like 200 centers in India and over 60 centers overseas, in the West as well as in Bangladesh. They run an incredible nearly 800 academic and technical institutions, catering to something like 200,000, 2 lakh students. And they have also been publishing very scholarly books on spirituality and religion. So you have got this kind of a organization that is not motivated by the usual stuff we read about in textbooks on management, but purely, when I forgot, there are 1,000 centers all over the world which are formed by the devotees of Ramakrishna, which are independent of the mission itself, but connected with it, loosely connected. So you've got this enormous movement which is spreading spirituality and good values, where people give rather than take, give money rather than take. And that is true of the other ones I mentioned also. The other kind of mission-oriented organization is the one that is set up by the government. Now, many of these have not been functioning too well, but some have functioned tremendously well. For example, ISRO, Aadhaar, uh, one-day meal scheme, NDDB, all of these have a tremendous impact. ISRO has put us on the space map. Not only that, ISRO has also contributed to the economic development of India because space technology can be used to map natural resources, long-term education, and so on. So BHEL, for example, our power generating capacity at the time of independence was about 2,000 megawatts. Today it is nearly 500,000 megawatts, 250 times more. Okay. How come? Because BHEL was set up to produce power generation equipment. And the National Thermal Power Corporation was set up to set up thermal plants. And between these two, they were able to increase our power generating capacity, something like 250 times. It's an incredible feat. So that is true of Aadhaar, linking up hundreds of millions of people with government schemes of one kind. NDDB, the milk revolution, which made India the largest producer of milk in the world. So these are organizations that have contributed immensely because they are imbued with a sense of mission. People are paid salaries. The organization is by and large professionally managed. But money is not the most important motivator. It is a sense of mission, commitment to the country. And that commitment to the country, that sense of mission is what makes this organization so outstanding. So I came across this kind of management, which I felt was so important for us to teach in business schools. Business is not just for business. The whole idea of business is to good for people. Of course, commercially, you make a profit. But ultimately, it is not just to make money. You are contributing something of value to society. So this idea of, first of all, high velocity, creative, big payoff actions kind of management, plus the missionary kind of management, plus the cause-oriented management of NGOs. Now, these are management's magics that need to be taught in our MBA programs and more broadly known to people. I've been studying management excellence for now about 50, 55 years. I think I would like to conclude by sharing one insight I've gained, which not only is, see, to me, life is not possible without management. We as individuals, family, community, enterprises, social organizations, government bodies, all of them need to be managed. What is management ultimately? You have to make choices to gain some goals, achieve some goals. So management is something that is universal. It is something which is essential for life, not only for the human species, but also for the other species. My sense from all this 50, 55 years of work with enterprises, NGOs, mission-oriented companies, government bodies, public enterprises, and public government bodies, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, there are 3 C's that I've identified, which I think gives excellence when they are blended well together. First is creativity and innovation. Second is compassion, concern for the well-being of others. And third is competence. When all of these things are fused together, blended together appropriately in the appropriate circumstances, then you have excellence. Whether it's individual or a family or an enterprise or a community or a government body our societies. With that, I thank you again, Deepak Bhai, for inviting me to give a talk. And now, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.